G'day guys, today I want to talk about how to cut the emotional umbilical cord with your mother. Now you may wonder why you want to do this or what I'm talking about. So the emotional umbilical cord is a metaphor to refer to that ability that your mother has to control or dominate you or influence you in ways that you may not like. Now the origin of the emotional umbilical cord goes back to when you were an infant, when your ability to comply with what your mother wanted was kind of essential to your survival, since you were totally dependent on her to feed and clothe and house you. And at some point during your development, you need to cut this emotional umbilical cord if you want to grow up from being a boy into being a man. The sad fact is that many men in our modern society are walking around basically as children in a man's body. And a lot of women can sense this. So if you're walking around really just as a boy who never grew up because you're still emotionally enmeshed with your mother, then a lot of women that you come across will be able to pick this up. And what will happen is you'll either end up attracting controlling women, particularly if your mother was very controlling, into your life because they know that you've got this enmeshment still that they can take advantage of. And they're not necessarily thinking that consciously. A lot of this operates on an unconscious level. Or you'll find that women just don't find you very attractive, very handsome, or very sexy because basically there's not very much sexy about a boy. Women are looking for a man. They're not looking for another boy that they want to mother. Well, some of them are, but those are not the women that you really want to be involved with. So the key to this is cutting the emotional umbilical cord with your mother. And what I want to do is give you some practical ideas on how you can go about doing this so that you can be free to live a life that doesn't suck all the time. So my first practical tip, number one, is to become financially independent. It's extremely difficult to become emotionally independent from your mother if you're still financially dependent on her. Now I understand that this can be complicated because it might involve getting a job, getting a career that you love, doing something that you enjoy that is financially rewarding to the point where you do not need your mother's financial assistance anymore or your father's financial assistance and the ability to move out of home. It's very difficult to maintain clear, healthy adult boundaries with your parents if you're still living under their roofs. A lot of parents don't have the emotional insight and the self-awareness to handle that kind of transition from adult child to adult adult, which is really what we're talking about here, if you're still living in their same physical space. So becoming financially independent is a very important step. And I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who was complaining about her controlling mother and the way that she dominated and controlled her and made her very depressed by the way her mother behaved. She was whining and complaining about my mother does this and my mother does that and I hate it when my mother does this. And my friend was never really standing up to her mother when she did these things that really upset her. And at the end of it, my friend said, look, she even gives me an allowance. Can you believe it? I'm 55 years old and my mother still gives me an allowance. And I just said to her, well, hang on a second. You complain a lot about your mother, but you're taking that allowance from her. Like you're still allowing her to control you financially by accepting the allowance, which you don't need. Like financially, it's a token amount. You don't actually need the money, but as long as you're continuing to accept it from her, she has that control over you. So, it's time for you to stand up for yourself and stop accepting the allowance. And this is very much the case with you guys as well. If you're still accepting money from your mother, it's time for you to stand up for yourself and stop doing that, rather than blaming her for trying to control you all the time. You're letting it happen. Now, the way the universe works is that it always puts us to the test when we say these brave, bold things. So sure enough, the very next day after telling my friend that she should stop accepting the allowance from her mother that her mother's using to control her, I get a Christmas card in the mail with a very generous check for $500. And this particular month I'd allowed my credit card balance to go negative and I actually really needed the money. But if you've been reading my blog, you'll be familiar with my relationship with my mother. At the moment we're not speaking and I really felt very uncomfortable about the whole idea of accepting money from my mother when what I'm really wanting is emotional respect. So she's offering one thing when I'm wanting something else. And I ended up saying, look, I wrote a letter back to her saying, look, thank you very much for the Christmas card and the very generous check, but I'm including the check and I'm returning it to you because I just don't feel comfortable accepting money from you when what I really want is a commitment that you'll treat me with respect. Number two is the standing up to behavior that we don't like. So if your mother is behaving in a way that you do not like, as I've just described, then the only way to get that to change is to stand up to it. It's very unlikely that your mother's behaviour is going to change of its own accord. And even if her behaviour stays the same, the important thing is that you start standing up for yourself so that you can set a boundary with her and say, look, the way that you're treating me isn't acceptable. Now, men and women see things differently. So if you and your mother saw eye to eye, I'd be worried about that because she's a woman and you're a man. And men and women are biologically different. We're wired differently. Our physiology is different. Sexually, we're different. There are a lot of differences between men and women. And when a man comes to me and sees eye to eye with everything that his mother says or does, well, that kind of worries me. So get used to the fact that there's likely to be conflict between you and your mother at some points in time. In any long-term relationship, there's always going to be conflict, and you need to stop avoiding the conflict with your mother if you want to stand up to her. Now, there's a very, very simple formula for doing this. It's just the assertiveness formula to use, and it goes like this. When you X, I feel Y. Where X is any kind of behavior or a thing that your mother says or does, and the more specific you can be about that, the better. And Y is the emotion that you feel in response to that. And generally, it's going to be one of the 5 unpleasant emotions: guilt, shame, anger, sadness, or fear. And I got a hunch that for a lot of guys watching this video, the emotion that you probably haven't expressed to your mother is anger, because that was certainly the case for me. So a practical example in my case, the big thing that I was most afraid of saying to my mother and standing up to her was the way that she treated my father. So applying the assertiveness formula, it went like this. When you criticize and belittle my father in front of me, I feel angry. It's very, very simple, and yet I cannot tell you just how frightened I was of actually saying that to my mother the first time. I was overwhelmed with feelings of fear, guilt, and shame. Like, how dare me stand up to my mother and say these things to her, this woman that brought me into the world. But if you want to cut the emotional umbilical cord and be free to be your own man rather than simply following the pattern of behaviour that your mother has conditioned you with all your life, this is how you do it. Stand up to her and you say, look, when you do this, this is how I feel about it. Do this over and over, often enough, and eventually either she'll get the message, she'll start understanding how you feel more in response to how she's behaving, or you'll get to the point where you realise that it's important not to have contact with this person for a while and to redraw some new boundaries with her. So point number 3 is to express the anger that you have towards your mother. This is just a special case really of point number 2 of standing up to her and being assertive. And I highly recommend that if you have anger towards your parents that you have not been expressing, it's likely to come up in the way that they're currently behaving. You don't really need to dredge up stuff that happened in the past, because if your parents and your mother in particular are still behaving in a way that you're emotionally enmeshed with, more than likely she's going to be doing things that are going to be making you angry. And I've got a hunch that up until now you probably haven't been saying that to her in a clear and concise and direct way. Remember again the assertiveness formula. When you do X, I feel angry. It's very, very simple. You don't need to justify how you feel. You don't need to label her behaviour in any way. You don't need to criticise her. You don't need to call her a controlling bitch or any of those kind of things. All you have to do is say, when you do X, I feel angry. Okay, number 4 is to establish some new boundaries and ground rules for your relationship. This is very important for me in cutting the emotional umbilical cord with my mother. I found that after expressing how I felt towards her, I did get to the point where she stopped talking over me and was almost willing to listen to what I had to say. But I realised that I just didn't feel safe around her because the boundaries that we had in place meant that she was open to criticising me at any point and trying to control me through her the things that she said and the way that she behaved. So I highly recommend that you negotiate some new boundaries with your mother so that you can transition from the boundaries that you had when you were a child and you had an adult-child relationship with her into the sort of boundaries that you want when you're in an adult relationship with her. If you want to see the boundaries that I attempted to negotiate with my mother, you can read the article I wrote, which is titled How to Treat Each Other with Respect. Now, at this point in time, my mother hasn't agreed to treat me with respect, but remember, the point of this isn't to get your mother to behave in any particular way. The point of this is to cut the emotional enmeshment that you have with her so that you can behave in the way that you want to behave in the world, rather than in a way that simply reflects her control, manipulation, or indoctrination, or whatever it is that she's conditioned you to be. So you don't need a particular response from her. The important thing is to stand up and initiate the new boundaries that you would like in the relationship. Number 5 is to learn to manage your fear. Standing up to your mother and cutting the emotional umbilical cord may release a great deal of primal fear in you. This comes about because there was a time in our lives when we were completely dependent on our mother's love, support, survival, and nurture for our survival. So cutting the emotional umbilical cord can release a great deal of primal fear that we may still be hanging on to, and this is basically the reason why many men never take this journey. However, the upside of this is that once you've released that primal fear of your mother, you won't end up projecting it on other people anymore, and you'll find yourself being much more calm and centered around women and around men generally, because the great fear that you had of upsetting your mother, which you project onto other people, has dissipated. My life started to change in a big way when I decided that my highest value wasn't keeping my mother happy. Now, it's not that keeping my mother happy is a bad thing, or that I want to deliberately upset her. It's simply that there are things that are more important to me than keeping her happy. And if I go and do those things and it upsets her, well, that's her problem to manage. It's her emotions that are being triggered. So rather than me just avoiding doing the things that might upset her, my mother, now I do the things that are really important to me, and I don't let that get in the way of me deciding whether I should or shouldn't do something. So learning to manage fear is very important. Once you're managing your fear, you can start going on to number 6, which is to start making your own choices in life. This is particularly important if you've been very emotionally enmeshed with your mother. There's a very high likelihood that a lot of the choices you've made in your life up until now have been based on what would keep her happy rather than on what would make you happy. And remember that a lot of what we're talking about here operates on an unconscious level. So we can be unconsciously making choices that try to keep our mother happy if we're still emotionally enmeshed with her, rather than doing the things that are most important to us, the things that would create a happy life for us, or the things that we would just find most rewarding. So starting to make your own choices is very important. I recently made a choice to move to a beachside suburb where I now live like 10 minutes walk from the beach. I've never lived by the beach before, but I absolutely love it. I had a hunch that I'd enjoy living by the beach. I mean, it's a pretty good lifestyle. Go down the beach anytime, go bodyboarding, hang out with people down there, meet girls on the beach. Like, it's great. And yet up until now, I'd never given myself permission to live by the beach. I'd never even thought that I really wanted to. So once you cut your emotional enmeshment with your mother and start making your own choices, you get to explore things that you might not have tried before, have experiences that you might not have tried before. A whole world of possibilities opens up that you previously weren't even aware of. And the key to this is stepping outside your comfort zone and making your own decisions rather than always thinking, oh, what would my mother think of that? Or if you have sisters, what would your sisters think of that? I have 2 sisters, and I'd have to say that some of what I experience in my relationships with them is simply a reflection of programming from our mother that they haven't dealt with yet. So therefore, I also have to think, okay, keeping them happy is nice, but it's not my most important goal in life. So if I'm to do what I really want to do in life, it might upset the people that are around me, but still dealing with the primal fear around that is your way out of that situation. And finally, number 6. What are we up to? Finally, number 7 is to connect with other men. Often if we've been heavily emotionally enmeshed with our mother, our relationships with other men will have suffered because mummy's trying to control us all the time. And men can instinctively pick this up as well, and will notice that you're not really all that appealing to be around and that you're basically just a boy in a man's body. So I highly recommend that you connect with other men while going through this process. It's also very important to have the stability and support of masculine men who know where they're at in life, know what they're doing, and are not at the whim of your mother. See, you're the only man on the planet that sees your mother in the way that you see her. Other men just see her as a woman in her 70s, 80s, 60s, however old she is. they're not really going to care too much what she thinks or how she feels or what's important to her. There are going to be things that are more important to them. You're the only one that really has this relationship with your mother because of the way that she brought you up. And hanging around other men can give you a bit of stability and a bit of sanity, particularly during the times when your mother is overreacting and making out that the world is ending simply because you're establishing some healthy boundaries in your relationship with her. So, yeah, get the support of other men. I highly recommend getting a man as a coach if you're in this situation and you're just not sure what to do. I'm available. You can get in touch with me through the Confident Man Project. Hook up on the forums, grab a copy of the Confident Man Program Guide, and start breaking that emotional enmeshment with your mother so that you can start living a life that you absolutely love rather than one that kind of sucks because it's been built for you basically by a woman who did what she wanted rather than what you really want.